Pax vobiscum, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to continue reading Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. We are now in part 3 of this book, and today we will begin with chapter 34, A Horse Fair. No doubt a horse fair is a very amusing place to those who have nothing to lose. At any rate, there is plenty to see. Long strings of young horses out of the country, fresh from the marshes, and droves of shaggy little Welsh ponies no higher than Merrylegs, and hundreds of cart horses of all sorts, some of them with their long tails braided and tied up with scarlet cord, and a good many like myself, handsome and high-bred, but fallen into the middle class through some accident or blemish, unsoundness of wind, or some other complaint. There were some splendid animals quite in their prime and fit for anything. They were throwing out their legs and showing off their paces in high style, as they were trotted out in a leading rein, the groom running by the side. But around in the background there were a number of poor things, sadly broken down with hard work, with their knees buckling over and their hind legs swinging out with every step. And there were some very dejected-looking old horses, with the underlip hanging down and the ears lying back heavily, as if there were no more pleasure in life, and no more hope. There were some so thin you might see all their ribs, and some with old sores on their backs and hips. These were sad sights for a horse to look upon. Who knows not but he may come to the same state. There was a great deal of bargaining, of running up and beating down, and if a horse may speak his mind so far as he understands, I should say that there were more lies told and more trickery at the horse fair than a clever man could give an account of. I was put with 2 or 3 other strong, useful-looking horses, and a good many people came to look at us. The gentlemen always turned from me when they saw my broken knees, though the man who had me swore it was only a slip in the stall. The first thing was to pull my mouth open, then to look at my eyes, then feel all the way down my legs, and give me a hard feel of the skin and flesh, and then try my paces. It was wonderful what a difference there was in the way these things were done. Some did it in a rough, offhand way, as if one was only a piece of wood, while others would take their hands gently over one's body, with a pat now and then, as much as to say, "By your leave." Of course, I judged a good deal of the buyers by their manners to myself. There was one man I thought if he would buy me I should be happy. He was not a gentleman, nor yet one of the loud, flashy sort that called himself so. He was rather a small man, but well-made, and quick in all his motions. I knew in a moment by the way he handled me that he was used to horses. He spoke gently, and his grey eye had a kindly, cheery look in it. It may seem strange to say, but it is true all the same, that the clean, fresh smell there was about him made me take to him. No smell of old beer and tobacco, which I hated, but a fresh smell, as if he had come out of the hayloft. He offered £23 for me, but that was refused, and he walked away. I looked after him, but he was gone, and a very hard-looking, loud-voiced man came. I was dreadfully afraid he would have me, but he walked off. 1 or 2 more came who did not mean business, and then the hard-faced man came back again and offered £23. A very close bargain was being driven, for my salesman began to think he should not get all he asked and must come down. But just then the grey-eyed man came back again. I could not help reaching out my head toward him. He stroked my face kindly. "Well, old chap," he said, "I think we should suit each other. I'll give 24 for him." "Say 25, and you shall have him." 24.10, said my friend in a very decided tone, "and not another 6 pence. Yes or no?" "Done," said the salesman, "and you may depend upon it there's a monstrous deal of quality in that horse, and if you want him for cab work, he's a bargain." The money was paid on the spot, and my new master took my halter and led me out of the fair to an inn, where he had a saddle and bridle ready. He gave me a good feed of oats and stood by while I ate it, talking to himself and talking to me. Half an hour after, we were on our way to London, through pleasant lanes and country roads, until we came to the great London thoroughfare, on which we travelled steadily, till in the twilight we reached the great city. The gas lamps were already lighted. There were streets to the right, and streets to the left, and streets crossing each other, for mile upon mile. I thought we should never come to the end of them. At last, in passing through one, we came to a long cab stand, when my rider called out in a cheery voice, "Good night, governor." "Hello," cried a voice. "Have you got a good one?" "I think so," replied my owner. "I wish you luck with him." "Thank you, governor," and he rode on. We soon turned up one of the side streets, and about halfway up we turned into a very narrow street, with rather poor-looking houses on one side, and what seemed to be coach-houses and stables on the other. My owner pulled up at one of the houses and whistled. The door flew open, and a young woman, followed by a little girl and a boy, ran out. There was a very lively greeting as my rider dismounted. "Now then, Harry, my boy, open the gates and mother will bring us the lantern." The next minute they were all standing round me in the small stable-yard. "Is he gentle, father?" "Yes, Dolly, as gentle as your own kitten. Come and pat him." At once the little hand was patting all about my shoulder without fear. How good it felt. "Let me get him a bran mash while you rub him down," said the mother. "Do, Polly, it's just what he wants, and I know you've got a beautiful mash ready for me." "Sausage dumpling and apple turnover," shouted the boy, which set them all to laughing. I was led into a comfortable, clean-smelling stall, with plenty of dry straw, and after a capital supper I lay down, thinking that I was going to be happy. Jeremiah Barker was my new master's name, but as everyone called him Jerry, I shall do the same. Polly, his wife, was just as good a match as a man could have. She was a plump, trim, tidy little woman, with smooth dark hair, dark eyes, and a merry little mouth. The boy was 12 years old, a tall, frank, good-tempered lad, and little Dorothy, Dolly they called her, was her mother over again at 8 years old. They were all wonderfully fond of each other. I never knew such a happy, merry family before or since. Jerry had a cab of his own and 2 horses, which he drove and attended to himself. His other horse was a tall, white, rather large-boned animal called Captain. He was old now, but when he was young he must have been splendid. He still had a proud way of holding his head and arching his neck. In fact, he was a high-bred, fine-mannered, noble old horse, every inch of him. He told me that in his early youth he went to the Crimean War. He belonged to an officer in the cavalry, and used to lead the regiment. I will tell more of that hereafter. The next morning, when I was well groomed, Polly and Dolly came into the yard to see me and make friends. Harry had been helping his father since early morning, and had stated his opinion that I should turn out a regular brick. Polly brought me a slice of apple, and Dolly a piece of bread, and made as much of me as I had been Black Beauty of olden time. It was a great treat to be petted again and talked to in a gentle voice, and I let them see as well that I wished to be friendly. Polly thought I was very handsome, and had a great deal too good for a cab, if it was not for the broken knees. "Well, of course, there's no one to tell us whose fault that was," said Jerry. "As long as I don't know, I shall give him the benefit of the doubt. For a firmer, neater stepper I never rode. We'll call him Jack, after the old one. Shall we, Polly?" "Do," she said, "for I like to keep a good name going." Captain went out to the cab all the morning. Harry came in after school to feed me and give me water. In the afternoon I was put into the cab. Jerry took as much pains to see if the collar and bridle fitted comfortably as if he had been John Manley over again. When the crupper was let out a hole or two, it all fitted well. There was no check-rein, no curb, nothing but a plain ring snaffle. What a blessing that was. After driving through the side street, we came to the large cab stand where Jerry had said good night. On one side of this wide street were the high houses with wonderful shop fronts, and on the other was an old church and churchyard surrounded by iron palisades. Alongside these iron rails a number of cabs were drawn up, waiting for passengers. Bits of hay were lying about on the ground. Some of the men were standing together talking. Some were sitting on their boxes reading the paper, and one or two were feeding their horses with bits of hay and giving them a drink of water. We pulled up in the rank at the back of the last cab. 2 or 3 men came round and began to look at me and pass their remarks. "Very good for a funeral," said one. "Too smart-looking," said another, shaking his head in a very wise way. "You'll find out something wrong one of these fine mornings, or my name isn't Jones." "Well," said Jerry pleasantly, "I suppose I need not find it out till it finds me out, And if so, I'll keep up my spirits a little longer." Then there came up a broad-faced man, dressed in a great grey coat with a great grey cap and a great white buttons, a grey hat and a blue comforter loosely tied around his neck. His hair was grey too, but he was a jolly-looking fellow, and the other men made way for him. He looked me all over, as if he had been going to buy me, and then straightening himself up with a grunt, said, "He's the right sort for you, Jerry. I don't care what you gave for him, he'll be worth it." And thus my character was established in the stand. This man's name was Grant, but he was called Grey Grant, or Governor Grant. He had been the longest on that stand of any of the men, and he took it upon himself to settle matters and stop disputes. He was generally a good-humoured, sensible man, but if his temper was a little out, as it was sometimes when he had drunk too much, nobody liked to come too near his fist, or he could deal a very heavy blow. The first week of my life as a cab horse was very trying. I had never been used to London, and the noise, the hurry, the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages that I had to make my way through made me feel anxious and harassed. But I soon found that I could perfectly trust my driver, and then I made myself easy and got used to it. Jerry was as good a driver as I had ever known, and what was better, he took as much thought for his horses as he did for himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best, and he never laid the whip on me unless it was gently drawing the end of it over my back when I was to go on. But generally I knew this quite well by the way in which he took his reins, and I believe his whip was much more frequently stuck up by his side than in his hand. In a short time I and my master understood each other as well as horse and man can do. In the stable, too, he did all that he could for our comfort. The stalls were the old-fashioned style, too much on the slope, but he had 2 movable bars fixed across the back of our stalls, so that at night, and when we were resting, he just took off our halters and put up the bars, and thus we could turn about and stand whichever way we pleased, which is a great comfort. Jerry kept us very clean, and gave us as much of change of food as he could, and always plenty of it. And not only that, but he always gave us plenty of clean, fresh water, which he allowed to stand by us both night and day, except, of course, when we came in warm. Some people say that a horse ought not to drink all he likes, but I know if we were allowed to drink when we want to drink, we drink only a little at a time, and it does us a great deal more good than swallowing down half a bucketful at a time, because we have been left without till we are thirsty and miserable. Some grooms will go home to their beer, and leave us for hours with our dry hay and oats and nothing to moisten them. Then of course we gulp down too much at once, which helps to spoil our breathing and sometimes chills our stomachs. But the best thing we had here was our Sundays for rest. We worked so hard in the week that I do not think we could have kept it up but for that day. Besides, we then had time to enjoy each other's company. It was on these days that I learned my companion's history. Captain had been broken in and trained for an army horse. His first owner was an officer of cavalry going out to the Crimean War. He said he quite enjoyed the training with all the other horses, trotting together, turning together to the right hand or the left, halting at the word of command or dashing forward at full speed at the sound of the trumpet or signal of the officer. He was, when young, a dark dappled iron grey, and considered very handsome. His master, a young, high-spirited gentleman, was very fond of him, and treated him from the first with the greatest care and kindness. He told me he thought the life of any army horse was very pleasant, but when it came to being sent abroad over the sea in a great ship, he almost changed his mind. "That part of it," said he, "was dreadful. Of course, we could not walk on the land into the ship, so they were obliged to put strong straps under our bodies, and then we were lifted off our legs in spite of our struggles, and were strung through the air over the water to the deck of the great vessel. There we were placed in small close stalls, and never for a long time saw the sky or were able to stretch our legs. The ship sometimes rolled about in high winds, and we were knocked about and felt bad enough. However, at last it came to an end, and we were hauled up and swung over again to the land. We were very glad and snorted and neighed for joy, when once we were more felt firm ground under our feet. We soon found that the country we had come to was very different from our own, and that we had many hardships to endure besides the fighting. But many of the men were so fond of their horses they did everything they could to make them comfortable, in spite of snow, wet, and all things out of order." "But what about the fighting?" said I. "Was not that worse than anything else?" "Well," said he, "I hardly know. We always liked to hear the trumpet sound and to be called out, and were impatient to start off, though sometimes we had to stand for hours, waiting for the word of command, and when the word was given we used to spring forward as gaily and eagerly as if there were no cannonballs, bayonets, or bullets. I believe so long as we felt our rider firm in the saddle and his hand steady on the bridle, not one of us gave way to fear, not when the terrible bombshells whirled through the air, or when they burst into 1,000 pieces. I, with my noble master, went into many actions together without a wound, and though I saw horses shot down with bullets, pierced through with lances, and gashed with fearful sabre cuts, though we left them dead on the field or dying in agony of their wounds, I don't think I feared for myself. My master's cheery voice, as he encouraged his men, made me feel as if he and I could not be killed. I had such a perfect trust in him that while he was guiding me I was ready to charge up to the very cannon's mouth. I saw many brave men cut down, many fall mortally wounded from their saddles. I had heard the cries and groans of the dying. I had cantered over ground slippery with blood, and frequently had to turn aside to avoid trampling on wounded man or horse. But until one dreadful day I never felt terror, the day I shall never forget." Here old Captain paused for a while and drew a long breath. I waited, and he went on. "It was one autumn morning, and as usual, an hour before daybreak, our cavalry had turned out, ready caparisoned for the day's work, whether it might be fighting or waiting. The men stood by their horses waiting, ready for orders. As the light increased, there seemed to be some excitement among the officers, and before the day was well begun we heard the firing of the enemy's guns. Then one of the officers rode up and gave word for the men to mount, and in a second every man was in his saddle, and every horse stood expecting the touch of the rein or the pressure of his rider's heels, all animated, all eager. But still we had been trained so well that, except by the champing of our bits, and the restive tossing of our heads from time to time, it could not be said that we stirred. My dear master and I were at the head of the line, and as all sat motionless and watchful, he took a little stray lock of my mane which had turned over on the wrong side, laid it over on the right, and smoothed it down with his hand. Then, patting my neck, he said, "We shall have a day of it today, Bayard, my beauty, but we'll do our duty as we have done." He stroked my neck that morning more, I think, than he had ever done before, quietly on and on, as if he were thinking of something else. I loved to feel his hand in my neck, and arched my crest proudly and happily. But I stood very still, for I knew all his moods, and when he liked me to be quiet, and when gay. I cannot tell all that happened on that day, but I will tell of the last charge that we made together. It was across a valley right in front of the enemy's cannon. By this time we were well used to the roar of the heavy guns, the rattle of musket fire, and the flying of shot near us. But never had I ever been as such fire as we rode through on that day. From the right, from the left, and from the front, shot and shell poured in upon us. Many brave men went down. Many a horse fell, flinging his rider to the earth. Many a horse without a rider ran wildly out of the ranks. Then, terrified at being alone, with no hand to guide them, came pressing in among his old companions, to gallop with them to the charge. Fearful as it was, no one stopped, no one turned back. Every moment the ranks were thinned, but as our comrades fell, we closed in to keep them together, and instead of being shaken or staggered in our pace, our gallop became faster and faster as we neared the cannon. My master, my dear master, was cheering on his comrades with his right arm raised on high, when one of the balls whizzing close to my head struck him. I felt him stagger with the shock, though he uttered no cry. I tried to check my speed, but the sword dropped from his right hand. The rein fell loose from the left, and sinking backward from the saddle, he fell to the earth. The other riders swept past us, and by the force of their charge I was driven from the spot. I wanted to keep my place by his side, and not leave him under that rush of horses' feet, but it was in vain. And now, without a master or a friend, I was alone on that great slaughter ground, and then fear took hold of me, and I trembled as I had never trembled before. And I, too, as I had seen other horses do, tried to join the ranks and gallop with them. But I was beaten off by the swords of the soldiers. Just then a soldier whose horse had been killed under him caught my bridle and mounted me, and with this new master I was again going forward. But our gallant company was cruelly overpowered, and those who remained alive after the fierce fight for the guns came galloping back over the same ground. Some of the horses had been so badly wounded they could scarcely move from the loss of blood. Other noble creatures were trying on 3 legs to drag themselves along, and others were struggling to rise on their forefeet when their hind legs had been scattered by shot. After the battle, the wounded men were brought in, and the dead were buried. "And what about the wounded horses?" I said. "Were they left to die?" "No. The army farriers went over the field with their pistols and shot all that were ruined. Some that had only slight wounds were brought back and attended to. But the greater part of the noble, willing creatures that went out that morning never came back. In our stables there was only about 1 in 4 that returned. I never saw my dear master again. I believe he fell dead from that saddle. I never loved any other master so well. I went into many other engagements, but was only once wounded, and then not seriously. And when the war was over, I came back again to England, as sound and as strong as when I went out." I said, "I have heard people talk about war as if it is a very fine thing." "Ha!" said he. "I should think they never saw it. No doubt it is very fine when there is no enemy, when it is just exercise and parade and sham fight. Yes, it is very fine then. But when thousands of good, brave men and horses are killed or crippled for life, it has a very different look." "Do you know what they fought about?" said I. "No," he said. "That is more than a horse can understand. But the enemy must have been awfully wicked people, if it was right to go all that way over the sea on purpose to kill them." I never knew a better man than my new master. He was kind and good, and as strong for the right as John Manley, and so good-tempered and merry that very few people could pick a quarrel with him. He was very fond of making little songs and singing them to himself. One he was very fond of was this: "Come, father, mother, and sister and brother, come all of you, turn to and help one another." And so they did. Harry was as clever at stable work as a much older boy, and always wanted to do what he could. Then Polly and Dolly used to come in the morning to help with the cab, to brush and beat the cushions and rub the glass, while Jerry was giving us a cleaning in the yard, and Harry was rubbing the harness. There used to be a great deal of laughing and fun between them, and it put Captain and me in much better spirits than if we had heard scolding and harsh words. They were always early in the morning, for Jerry would say, "If you in the morning throw minutes away, you can't pick them up in the course of a day. You may hurry and scurry, and flurry and worry. You've lost them forever and die." He could not bear any careless loitering and waste of time, and nothing was so near making him angry as to find people, who were always late, wanting a cab horse to be driven hard to make up for their idleness. One day 2 wild-looking young men came out of a tavern close by the stand and called Jerry. "Here, cabby, look sharp, we are rather late. Put on the steam, will you, and take us to the Victoria in time for the 1 o'clock train. You shall have a shilling extra." "I will take you at a regular pace, gentlemen. Shillings don't pay for putting on steam like that." Larry's cab was standing next to ours. He flung open the door and said, "I'm your man, gentlemen. Take my cab, my horse will get you there all right." And as he shut them in with a wink toward Jerry, said, "It's against his conscience to go beyond a jog trot." Then slashing his jaded horse, he set off as hard as he could. Jerry patted me on the neck. "No, Jack, a shilling would not pay for that sort of thing, would it, old boy?" Although Jerry was determinately set against hard driving to please careless people, he always went at a good, fair pace, and was not against putting on the steam, as he said, if only he knew why. I well remember one morning, as we were on the stand waiting for a fare, that a young man carrying a heavy portmanteau trod on a piece of orange peel which lay on the pavement, and fell down with great force. Jerry was the first to run up and lift him. He seemed much stunned, and as they led him into a shop, he walked as if he were in great pain. Jerry, of course, came back to the stand, but in about 10 minutes one of the shopmen called him, so we drew up to the pavement. "Can you take me to the Southeastern Railway?" said the young man. "This unlucky fall has made me late, I fear. But it is of great importance that I should not lose the 12 o'clock train. I should be most thankful if you could get me there in time, and will gladly pay you the extra fare." "I'll do my best," said Jerry heartily. "You think you are well enough, sir?" For he looked dreadfully white and ill. "I must go," he said earnestly. Please to open the door, and let us lose no time." The next minute Jerry was on the box, with a cheery chirrup to me and a twitch of the rein that I well understood. "Now then, Jack, my boy," said he, "spin along. We'll show them how we can get over the ground, if we only know why." It was always difficult to drive fast in the city in the middle of the day when the streets are so full of traffic, but we did what could be done. And when a good driver and a good horse who understand each other are of one mind, it is wonderful what they can do. I had a very good mouth. That is, I could be guided by the slightest touch of the rein, and that is a great thing in London among carriages, omnibuses, carts, vans, trucks, cabs, and great wagons creeping along at a walking pace, some going one way, some another, some going slowly, others wanting to pass them, omnibuses stopping short every few minutes to take up a passenger, obliging the horse that is coming behind to pull up to, or to pass and get before them. Perhaps you try to pass, but just then something else comes dashing in through the narrow opening, and you have to keep in behind the omnibus again. Presently you think you see a chance, and manage to get to the front, going so near the wheels on each side that half an inch nearer and they would scrape. Well, you get along for a bit, but soon you find yourself in a long train of carts and carriages, all obliged to go at a walk. Perhaps you come to a regular block-up, and have to stand still for minutes altogether, till something clears out into a side street or the policeman interferes. You have to be ready for any chance, to dash forward if there be an opening, and be quick as a rat dog to see if there be room and if there be time, lest you get your own wheels locked or smashed, or the shaft of some other vehicle run into your chest or shoulder. All this you have to be ready for. If you want to get through London fast in the middle of the day, it wants a deal of practice. Jerry and I were used to it, and none could beat us at getting through when we were set upon it. I was quick and bold and could always trust my driver. Jerry was quick and patient at the same time, and could trust his horse, which was a great thing to do. He very seldom used the whip. I knew by his voice and his click-click when he wanted to get on fast, and by the rein where I was to go. So there was no need for whipping, but I must get back to my story. The streets were very full that day, but we got along pretty well as far as the bottom of Cheapside, where there was a block for 3 or 4 minutes. The young man put his head out and said anxiously, I think I'd better get out and walk. I shall never get there if this goes on. I'll do all that can be done, sir, said Jerry. I think we shall be in time. This block-up cannot last much longer, and your luggage is very heavy for you to carry, sir. Just then, in front of us, began to move on, and then we had a good turn. In and out we went, as fast as horseflesh could do it, and for a wonder had a good clear time on London Bridge, where there was a whole train of cabs and carriages all going our way at a quick trot, perhaps wanting to catch that very train. At any rate, we whirled into the station with many more, just as the great clock pointed to 8 minutes to 12 o'clock. Thank God we are in time, said the young man. Thank you, too, my friend, and your good horse. You have saved me more than money can ever pay for. Take this half-extra crown. No, sir, no. Thank you all the same. So glad we hit the time, sir. But don't stay now, sir. The bell is ringing. Here, porter, take this gentleman's luggage. Dover Line 12 o'clock train, that's it. And without waiting for another word, Jerry wheeled me round to make room for other cabs that were dashing up at the last minute, and drew up on one side till Crush was past. So glad, he said, so glad, poor young fellow. I wonder what it is that made him so anxious. Jerry often talked to himself quite loud enough for me to hear when we were not moving. On Jerry's return to the rank, there was a good deal of laughing and chaffing at him for driving hard to the train for an extra fare, as they said, all against his principles, and they wanted to know how much he had pocketed. A good deal more than I generally get, said he, nodding shyly. What he gave me will keep me in little comforts for several days. Gammon, said one. Oh, he's a humbug, said another, preaching to us and then doing the same himself. Look here, mates, said Jerry. The gentleman offered me half a crown extra, but I didn't take it. Just quite pay enough for me to see how glad he was to catch that train. And if Jack and I choose to have a quick run now and then to please ourselves, that's our business and not yours. Well, said Larry, you'll never be a rich man. Most likely not, said Jerry, but I don't know that I shall be less happy for that. I have heard the commandments read a great many times, and I never noticed that any of them said, Thou shalt be rich. And there are a good many curious things said in the New Testament about rich men that I think would make me feel rather queer if I was one of them. If you ever do get rich, said Governor Gray, looking over his shoulder across the top of his cab, you'll deserve it, Jerry, and you won't find a curse come with your wealth. As for you, Larry, you'll die poor. You spend too much in whipcord. Well, said Larry, what is a fellow to do if his horse won't go on without it? You never take the trouble to see if he will go without it. Your whip is always going as if you had the St. Vitus dance in your arm. If it does not wear you out, it wears your horse out. You know you are always changing your horses, and why? Because you never give them any peace or encouragement. Well, I have not had any good luck, said Larry. That's where it is. And you never will, said the governor. Good luck is rather particular who she rides with, and mostly prefers those who've got common sense and a good heart. At least, that is my experience. Governor Gray turned round again to his newspaper, and the other men went to their cabs. And that concludes today's readings of Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Not much to say about these chapters. These felt a little more storytelling rather than, anything discussion worth that I could kind of boil down to at the end of this reading session. One thing of note, though, especially, I think, is Captain talking about his role in the Crimean War and the fact that, the several cavalry officers cared very much about their horses, and then his dear master at the time stroking his neck over and over. I think that chapter in particular really does a good job of highlighting the bond between animal and man, especially, and that, these horses especially, yes, they were transportation, but horses are alive. They do not have reason like we do, but they do have emotions and personalities, and no horse is like the other. Same thing as human beings. And I think that chapter really sort of highlighted that, and again also highlighted just how much people and horses, people and animals can come to lean on each other for certain things. And that bond is nothing to sniff at. And we can see how much, I believe his name was Bayard, loved his master, and how distraught he was when his master unfortunately perished. And we can see too how much his master cared for Bayard, stroking his neck, making sure that he was taken care of. All important things. And I remember a very long time ago, the horse that I would ride for my riding lessons. Oh, I loved that horse. He was a silly beast, but I would do my absolute best to take care of him. And we see that sort of here. This is something I'll explore a little more. My words are not working with me right now, but I think that is an important distinction, is this idea that the bond especially between domesticated animals and humans, is so important and something that definitely needs to be treated with respect. So, that rambling out of the way, I hope you all enjoyed this reading. A new video for Black Beauty will be out next Monday, and we will continue on. We're getting sort of towards the end here, and before we know it, we'll be done, but I cannot wait to do the Vestavox episode for this book. I've been doing some research into certain articles, reviews, and so forth, and I think I'll have some interesting things to talk about. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I shall see you in the next video. Goodbye.